us. And I think also thinking about our current situation right now, looking at relations with Indigenous communities throughout Canada, Victoria, worldwide. So thank you for that. So just a little bit about who I am. My name is Regan Shrumm. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I'm just gonna again look through everyone's mute. I'm gonna unmute a couple folks. I'm just muting you for right now. I'm the assistant curator of the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. I identify as being queer and disabled. I'm kind of going to be your facilitator and moderator today. We also have Duncan Ferguson, who is also on. Thank you so much, Duncan, again. So if you have any questions, I'll be checking my email. Duncan will be checking his email on if you have any problems with Zoom. So during this webinar, we do have a chat feature. The chat feature is used, we ask if you can use it a little bit less of a chat and only when necessary. There are some folks who are using screen readers during this time and they can hear everything and it can be distracting. So we ask only use chat if it is necessary. The mute button is the one that should be on your left-hand side. I will be checking to make sure things are on mute, and the reason why we just keep it on mute for now is for background noise. For anyone, I don't know about you, but I have a 7-year-old who will be maybe playing piano during this, we'll see. But as we have a community conversation, everyone will be part of this conversation and will unmute you as you'd like to speak. In terms of wanting to leave the webinar, it should be on your right-hand side. If you leave the webinar, that's totally fine. We will be giving a recording just to people who are participating today. And we won't be putting that out to the public unless we distinctly email you and ask permission. But know that this is a safer space of all of us together, and to think through that. If you are using, if you're having trouble with the audio, please click and join audio. This is a reminder too, if you are using a phone call, phoning in right now and having trouble with the audio, remember, if you're using the video for your computer and audio for your phone, mute your computer so it doesn't get the feedback. And those are the phone numbers for the presentation. So today's screen, we will mostly not be screen sharing. We'll mostly just see all of our beautiful faces together, but you can look at the Zoom options for how much you want to take over your screen with Zoom. In the next week or two, I'll be sending a follow-up email, which will include today's presentation recording, a transcript of today's presentation, and feedback survey on the workshop, or community conversation, really. And then if you want to know a little bit more about the HGV programming, we ask that you follow us on social media. We also have a second part to this conversation that will be happening Wednesday, May 13th with Victoria artists Kate, Colleen, and Joanne Cuff. So we're very excited for that to be happening. And now, and just a brief talk about creating a brave space for this virtual space. I want to again acknowledge that this has been made for IPOC, disabled, LGBTQ2+, low and no income artists and individuals who have had difficulty in navigating the arts, both in Victoria, but also within the greater landscape of BC, of Canada, of North America. And we just want to make sure that we privilege those who are from those communities first. So if you are not from those communities, we ask that you still listen, but we ask that you look at how much space you are sharing. With confidentiality, we want to, again, talk about, share the message, not the messenger. So just kind of, if you're talking about this in another, to a friend or to a colleague, again, talk about the message that you heard, not naming the particular person. So I can understand, and can. So now I'll introduce our guest artists. Parker Johnson is an African-American adoptee from Savannah, Georgia. Parker grew up on Vancouver Island and is a psychology student and youth support worker. Parker has been primarily helping youth on the front line in group homes and out in the community. Parker created a platform called The Table almost a year ago, utilizing an Indigenous conversational mechanism. As an adopted settler identifying with the African diaspora, Parker is trying to decolonize conversation within the community. The goal is to remind people that they have a voice, that the act of being relational and trauma-informed of our language will help us reconnect to each other, hopefully coming to a deeper relationship with lands we reside on. The simple act of breaking bread and sharing stories is what historically brought us together, and this is Parker's motive. And the other artist who will be our guest artist today is Carmen. Carmen is a social practice artist who uses organizing strategies and improvisation to address his access to public space, the art institution, and visual culture. His work, which takes forms ranging from collaborative performance to public intervention, is an effort to unlearn visual primacy and resist support options that promote ableist conceptions of normalcy. Papalia's work has been featured at the Sullivan R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, the Tate Liverpool in Liverpool, UK, the Grand Central Art Center in Santa Ana, California, and Gallery Gachet in Vancouver, BC, among others. So I just will now stop sharing my screen. There we go. And we're going to just first, actually, maybe I'll start first and introduce some of the participants. So this is usually when we work in this and do these community conversations, we introduce each other, and this is a little bit different format because it's hard to do it virtually, but I still want to know who you are, where you're coming from, because this isn't just about Carmen Parker, this is about sharing the space and learning each other's experiences. So what I'm gonna do is, if anyone would like to speak right now, I ask if they can raise their hand and then I'll unmute you. And then, yeah, we ask that you spend a couple minutes explaining who you are and maybe why you're here. So let's see. Sorry, everyone. See if anyone has hands raised. Oh, I see one. And okay, so I'll listen here. So Allison, if you wanna.
Hi. I don't seem to be able to get video access for my face, but anyway. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I can't even see who else is in the room with this particular Zoom call. So I would just like to mention that for myself, in terms of accessibility, just in terms of technical accessibility, and I've used Zoom previously multiple
Allison,
times.
I think
so I just mentioned that, okay? I'm here, I represent the Housing Project 101, Transformational Theatre for Rental Housing. This is a project that I have launched to helped raise the profile of the stories of people who live their entire lives in rental housing. And I was very grateful to hear you mention economics as one of the areas of concern in terms of inclusiveness, because I think that oftentimes we overlook the people in our community who do live in extreme poverty in comparison to the income of the community. I think that we so I'm very grateful to you for having brought that forward. I also feel that people who live their entire lives in rental homes, who live their entire lives with that kind of instability of home, suffer also through instability of community, and that limits their accessibility to opportunities in the arts. And that's all I have to say. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just a note of why some people may not be able to access the video or the or see other people. I put people as panelists. So if you had been, if you registered at least until 11 or earlier, then you'll be a panelist. So that's why you're getting video. Maybe throughout this conversation, I can try to include some of you who are seen as attendees as panelists, so you can have all of your beautiful faces on the video. And I'm just wondering, anyone else? I'm realizing maybe those who are deemed as panelists may not be able to raise their hand. I see one head nod. So Shayla Robinson, would you like to speak? I see that your head is nodding, yes.
Yeah, definitely don't have the hand raise option as a panelist. Well, folks, my name is Shayla Robinson. I'm Coast Salish from the Access and First Nation, and I have family roots to Clement territory as well as Cowichan and Squamish territory. I am here. I am a performing artist, so you may know me by my stage name of Scarlet Hummingbird. And I'm here for interest for Indigenous folks, but also young folks, and being able to be considered like part of the art scene without necessarily having all the connections a lot of people seem to have, and trying to make sure that we can branch out and capture also artists who are maybe not necessarily seen very often as part of like the mainstream art scene, and to just make sure that Indigenous focus is here as well, as I feel like that lacks very often, especially local Indigenous artists from these territories, not just who are Indigenous from other parts of the world but live in the city. I feel like there's not enough prioritization of local artists here. So I'm just, that's my perspective for today.
Thank you so much. And I'm just going to look through, see if any other of the participants would like to say anything, just by looking at your beautiful faces. See if you want to. I do see. Oh, I see Linda. Okay, so Linda Bardem, I will put you on unmute. Maybe not. Oh, there we
go. Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, good. My name is Linda Bartram. I'm blind, and my computer keeps talking to me every time anything happens on it. So it's sometimes confusing as to whether I'm muted, unmuted, whether someone else is or not. So hopefully what my computer says doesn't interfere with other people. I'm the chair of the Victoria Society for Blind Arts and Culture, And it's just a small group, but we are trying to promote arts and culture within the blindness community from both the perspective of promoting art within the blindness community. There's very little of that happens, and there are blind people who would like to pursue art, and but it's very challenging to do that without some supports. So that's one piece, and also to get current artists to think about making their art more accessible to people who are blind. Most of art, or a lot of art, not most of art, a lot of art is visually, has a visual component to it, or is totally visual and is not accessible to blind people. And so sort of just getting people to think about multisensory art and incorporating other elements into art, art for more accessible to blind people. So I can speak a little bit to accessibility for other disabilities, but my main sort of focus is for people who are blind, both partially sighted and particularly for those who have no vision at all. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda, so much. And I'm just trying to see if anyone else would like to speak. I don't see. No, okay. So I'm going to, oh, sorry, Linda just wanted to raise her hand again. Oh. There we go. Linda, you're back on.
No, I didn't. I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't put my hand up again. I
Okay.
don't know. Maybe I have to put my hand down, do I?
No, I got you there.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to do is give the floor to Parker first. And Parker is just going to explain about his process. Then Carmen, who will explain about his process. So Carmen's probably will be talking about open access, and Parker about the table. From there, what we're going to have is about an hour or so conversation. I have a couple of questions that I have, but what we usually do is make it open to everyone. I do see that Tina Pearson pointed out, and thank you for this, Tina, about why some people can't see it, and the accessibility issue and the safety issue of that. So thank you so much for out. While Parker and Carmen are talking, I will be sorting that out. It's just some people who signed in earlier, I could make you a panelist right away. And others, I just didn't see you apply yet. So I will be working on that. So Parker, if you want to start the floor.
Sure. Just want to make sure that my sound is coming through all right.
Yes.
Great. Hello, everyone. I was telling Regan and Carmen, this is a fantastic way to start the week off. I really appreciate everybody taking out time to come together like this. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is Parker Johnson and my pronouns are he, him. As mentioned before, I identify as an African-American Canadian. I'm originally from Savannah, Georgia. I had the privilege of growing up here, but I learned very early on that I stood out like a sore thumb. Being a Black man in Victoria is not the easiest task. My motivation to start my platform, The Table, was to actively participate in decolonizing space. And as a Black man, that has been one of the most important things for me in my adult life, as I understand the different forms of oppression and colonization globally, and understanding indigeneity as a global term. What does it mean when we have all of these these people coming from different places and settling in one place. And so how can we understand those stories, but connect to the stories that were here before all of us? I am adopted. And when I first entered the school system from K all the way up to university, I've experienced all of these different variations of discrimination. And my family, having a white family, it was interesting seeing how I could slip into incognito mode. But when I was alone in the world reacted very differently to my presence. And I've been to different places in the world, and I can tell you that black is black is black is black. It does not matter. And it's been so important for me to connect with other people who identify with these kind of obstacles or these barriers or these experiences. And it's not just racialized experiences, because there are so many different ways of existing. Society creates or tries to set the norm of existence and then tries to force us into these ways of being, which we know is not okay. It's been my priority to uplift racialized and marginalized demographic. And the table utilizes, we're engaging in this mechanism called the kitchen table, and it's a communal method of coming together. And it's a very simple setup, and you just have the chairs around a perimeter creating a witnessing circle and a table in the center. And so what I do is every event is thematic. And so if we're discussing climate change, for example, we'll have folks come in and we'll prioritize the people that we don't get to often hear from very often. And so those in the witnessing circle will stay there, and we'll have folks in the table start off the conversation. It feels like you're witnessing like an actual kitchen table discussion. But throughout the night, people will trade places. And so when you're done speaking at the table, you join the witnessing circle, and someone from the witnessing circle joins the table. And I really made an effort to flip it on its head, this whole mechanism, because I wanted to really prioritize those of us who don't get the opportunity to take up space, and tackle things from an intersectional lens and learn new ways of being, and challenge those who hold more privilege than others to take a step back and share space, which is kind of a difficult thing to do when it's so automatic. There are many who just live with different levels of privilege, and we're not aware of how we exist in the world and how it affects others. So in this space, I ask that everybody leaves all of the baggage at the door and examine yourself and share and validate others. And so those of us who don't identify with the lived experience that is tied to the theme of the night are asked to take a back seat. And my wingman, who helps me with all of this, my dear friend Vishnu, said when we were in Vancouver, we were doing an anti-racism workshop for grades 5 to 7. It was like 200 kids at this really kind of bougie school. It was it was pretty incredible. But afterwards, he said, you know, we are reminding people that they have a voice, and that really stuck with me, because it made me think of capitalism. It made me think of how we are always in survival mode, and we forget how we can express ourselves with confidence. We forget how to reach out to other people and ask for help, and that's okay. All we need to do is remember and give ourselves the permission to do so. So I think in terms of artistry, it's something that we express since birth, and it has so many different ways and different mediums. It's different for everyone. And cross-culturally, what we create as we get older can carry quite important messages that help guide us and society. You know, whether it's a mask dance in Malawi or Cuba, expressing the important political criticisms of the time, or a mural depicting the importance of protecting the land. You know, there's an opportunity to express ourselves in all of these different mediums. We just have to find them, or the right people will help us find them. And this is kind of a precarious time. You know, we're all social distancing or quarantining, or we have family members really struggling right now, and we see class disparities really highlighted right now. And I think Allison at the beginning was alluding to that, and I think it's really important that we all take a moment to think about that. You know, like the virus may all have us on a lockdown right now, but it doesn't discriminate. But employers do, the healthcare system does, society does, privilege does. And the purpose of the table is to challenge these systems and create more dialogue, however that looks, sounds, or feels, so we can shift the culture. And so I have a couple of examples of events that I've run. And one that was more recent was with the Integrated Dance Collective. And again, it echoed how society is not set up to accommodate or encourage those who experience different barriers in the arts, whether that be a physical mobility or otherwise. And you look at the architecture and the layout of the land, and it echoes that. And it's a message that I identify with as a Black man, because one of the things that comes up during my events is, this place was not set up for me. And that becomes an internalized message, and that really dampens the spirit, as many of us know. And what I love about the table is that I'll just go to different places, whether that be a really busy co-working space or a school or a workplace. And I'll just take up the space and I'll set up the table there. And it really changes the tonality and leaves people with these questions of, oh, wow, how can I move differently? How can I make room for all of these other ways of being that I haven't been able to see before? And it's the support of the platform has been astounding. It's continued to organically grow. And I started it a year ago. My partner jokes with me, like, what possessed me to do this? Like, well, still being in school. And some of my friends, they say, you know, this is, I think it just feels so automatic. It just feels so natural when you look around the room or you interact with people who you don't often get the chance to interact with. It does something to your baseline. You leave feeling empowered. And I ran another event at Watershed. It's a co-working space downtown, another one, focusing on racialized artist experiences. And the same message rang through. You see that there's a theme throughout all of these. Even though we choose a topic, there's a theme, and that is, what does oppression look like through society? How does it affect us? What is capitalism doing to us? And what I hear from my artists, friends, and colleagues more often than not, it's that we have to work harder, not only to show our work, but we have to work to even have our art acknowledged in the first place, or for many of us, to have the opportunity. And you know, I don't need to explain how the ways in which that's unfair, but it's in these conversations that we can create the solutions and network and figure out ways to create more of those opportunities. This project really has shown me what community looks like when those of us who are not used to taking up space do. And what happens when we challenge our society to make room for everyone. And there's a saying that many of my friends in the Black community and Indigenous communities here that we say, and it's that our liberation is entwined, and you know, we are not free until we're all free. And I think that when you take a moment to examine the privileges that you hold and use them in a way that challenges the system that you exist in, it may not happen overnight, but you are going to see real change. And within the short year that I've run this platform, that change is already happening. I still am in contact with so many people who engage with the platform, teachers who are changing the way they operate in classrooms. How do I support the one Black student or the Indigenous community? How do I, and I love this one, how do I challenge the school district to create the funding, because it's there, to allocate the funding to the arts? And when I say the arts, I mean all mediums of it. What does it look like? So that's why I'm here, is just that, to remind everybody here that they have a way of expressing themselves and expressing their art. And if anybody has a need to connect to other communities that are wanting to express their art or their thoughts, the table is here for you. That's what we do. I love networking and bringing artists together, and there's been some pretty cool projects and fundraisers that have come up just by doing this. So I'll end with talking about what we're doing right now. I've had the privilege of working with ICA, the Intercultural Association, and we did it's kind of been an ongoing panel discussion on Black and Indigenous existence in Victoria, and now it's shifted into my work with VIRCS, the Victoria Immigrant Refugee Center, and Victoria Hospice. And what we're doing right now is examining the way in which the healthcare system affects our bodies, marginalized demographics, and we're doing that virtually. And it's so the table is this adaptive thing that, even though we're not, you know, physically there in person, we can still have these conversations virtually. And I hope to see some folks from this discussion join us at a future event. And I do encourage you to, if you are an artist, and whatever your art looks like, take up all the space however you can. And believe me, there are people out here, like the ones that are in this discussion, that will support you in doing that. And so if I can end with anything, it's that we have responsibility, I would say an obligation to each other, to make sure that everybody is seen and heard and experienced. And so that's what the table does. If you're okay with that, I could pass the torch to Carmen.
That was wonderful, Parker. Thank you so much. Yeah. Carmen, did you want me to start out reading, or do you want to just tell me when you're ready? Oh, you're on mute right now, Carmen. Oh, there you go.
Hi, everybody. Is my audio coming through?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, and Regan, I'll just tell you when to read that piece.
Sounds good.
My name's Carmen. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm talking to you from the unceded and occupied territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people, is where I grew up and I work. I think of myself as an artist. I didn't always think I would be an artist. I started practicing as an artist in 2010. And at that time, yeah, like I was really trying to figure out where my place within the art world was. I call myself a non-visual artist because I use my non-visual senses as a primary way of navigating my surroundings. I don't use words like blind or visually impaired to describe myself because I feel like those terms kind of like privilege visual experience, and I really have made an intentional choice to shift value from visual to the non-visual. So yeah, some of my first projects, like I guess I thought of them as experiments, um, you know, things that I was doing to like better understand my own position as someone who's disabled. Um, Things that I was doing to explore those dynamics. What does it mean to be disabled among non-disabled peers? Um, so a lot of my work, I think, and from the very beginning, was really a way to message out to an uninformed non-disabled audience. So really to highlight some of those dynamics, to make space for conversations that I didn't have access to. And yeah, really kind of work through things that I felt very limited by and compromised by. And a lot of my my early work was about the white cane. So like, you know, the you know, you might have witnessed one at one point. You know, I call it my detection cane because I use it to detect obstacles. Some people use it to identify themselves. I was always uncomfortable with the way it identified me, so I was always trying to like modify that cane to, you know, change that interaction with other people that I had. And so some of my performances, you know, this has led to a bunch of creative work. One of my performances is a series where I replace my cane with different things and then try to navigate the city. So one thing being a marching band that sort of helps me navigate an unfamiliar place by making musical cues that indicate obstacles. My work really, like, I really think that from the very beginning, my work was an effort to enliven what I call open access. This is a concept that I've been trying to develop and make space for. I wrote this manifesto in 2015 called Open Access, and at the time it was really just my own way of describing my position on the topic of accessibility. Um, and really trying to define something that like I didn't have words for. It was like this, it's like, you know, whenever I've been, you know, I've spent a lot of time in hospital since I was a kid. As a lot of disabled people do, I rely on, you know, um, like hospitals, the medical system. And I think I have like a lot of trauma from those interactions. I still hold trauma from those interactions. I think a lot of those experiences, my experiences with institutions like the healthcare institution, really inform the ways that I look at institutions like the museum and university and places of learning. And I think some of those same dynamics that I've experienced as within the medical system are pretty consistent across the board when it comes to institutions and the way they categorize people, the way that power works and agency works for people entering from the outside. And so that's really, I think, informed like how I define accessibility. And for me, accessibility is not just like a set of policies that's implemented from the top down. It's, you know, it's something that is alive, that evolves, that changes based on who's present at any given time, what their politics are, you know, social conditions. So a lot of what everybody said, as you know, Parker and the few people who introduced themselves as well. I think it really, yeah, with my, I think it really resonates with me. The what Parker's trying to do with the table and doing with that work, as well as you know, what the access points that people identified. You know, being financial, you know, things around sensory translation as well. I think accessibility is all of these things. And usually it is, when we talk about accessibility, we're usually talking about, you know, the disability community specifically. And I think within that group, we're often thinking about physical accessibility or sensory translation. So like accommodations, modifications made to a space so it could become accessible because it was designed without the group, those groups in mind. It was designed around like a certain set of parameters that did not consider the lived experience of people with disabilities, the lived experience of people who are racialized, indigenous, and so yeah, I think if I were to describe my approach to accessibility, it would really be like a disability justice approach. And this idea of disability justice comes from the Disability Justice Collective, which was a group of Black, Brown, queer, and trans activists who met around this idea of like, you know, what is a more productive way at looking at these the world around us. And really, so one of the outcomes from the Disability Justice Collective's convening was the Disability Justice Framework, which proposes that, you know, systems of oppression like like colonialism, racism, sexism are all intertwined, and they're all kind of like strengthened by ableism. So yeah, I really think accessibility is something that has to do with one's agency. It's something that applies to everybody. You know, it's a measure of agency. Like, do you have decision-making power? Do you have representation? You know, whether that's in a social space, on a board of directors. You know, is your experience represented? Who's the space for? And I think open access really makes this proposal where, you know, I'll have Regan read you the open access statement, and it's just 5 like short paragraphs, really like a poem about accessibility. But I think you really have to kind of like find yourself inside of that text. You have to connect to it in a way and make use of it for yourself in your own like sort of local context. So I'll have Regan read that. It's a short text, and then I'll get back to describing a little more.
Okay. So open access relies on those present, what their needs are, and how they can find support with each other and in their communities. It is a perpetual negotiation of trust between those who practice support as a mutual exchange. Open access is radically different than a policy that temporarily removes a barrier to participate for a group with definitive needs. It acknowledges that everyone carries a body of local knowledge and is an expert in their own right. Open access is the root system of embodied learning. It cultivates trust among those involved and enables each member to self-identify and occupy a point of orientation that centers complex embodiment. Open access disrupts the disabling conditions that limits one's agency and potential to thrive. It reimagines normalcy as a continuum of embodiments, identities, realities, and learning styles, and operates under the tenet that interdependence is central to radical reconstruction of power. Open access is a temporary, collectively held space where participants can find comfort in disclosing their needs and preference with one another. It is a responsive support network that adapts as needs and available resources change.
Thank you. Yeah, so that's the language that I kind of landed on when I started trying to describe what accessibility is to me, and in 2015. After that, I kind of started sharing that statement with folks whenever I would give a talk. Also have worked for over 7 years now with this Gallery Gachet in Vancouver's downtown east side, which is a collectively run space with a mandate around demystifying issues around mental health. So in 2015, I got a group of artists all coming from different backgrounds together, and I shared the open access statement with them, and we used it as a kind of a starting point, a guiding text to conduct an unsolicited accessibility audit of the Vancouver Art Gallery. So that was like an intervention that we conducted. We made an exhibition as a result of our assessment of the Vancouver Art Gallery. It was a critique of the institution from our points of view. Since then, I've kind of like traveled across the country, in the US and the UK and Europe, introducing the open access framework to different institutions, staff, and community members, in an effort to like start a new context for conversations around accessibility. So really, you know, have institutions that like meet and develop their own sort of mandate for accessibility at their institution, and really like set up a structure so they can check in about that process. People can meet across departments as well. Usually when I lead workshops or trainings, you know, all departments are participating, from like, you know, everyone from the director to front of house people to like curators, you know, public engagement, educators, all sorts of folks thinking about accessibility from their point of view within the institution. And usually what I'm asking people is to think about their institutional privileges, like the resources they have access to from their position, like formal, you know, material resources, but also informal, like privileges that they have. And I'm asking them to like think about how they might redistribute those resources to folks who are underrepresented in the space. Because really, I think thinking more and more about accessibility and doing research on the topic, I think it really does have to do with inequality. You know, folks who are underrepresented in the cultural sector have less opportunity. I mean, there's so many reasons for that. There have been studies, you know, through the New York Department of Cultural Affairs that have found like disabled folks have the least access to the cultural sector of any other minority group. You know, and it's for the reason of physical accessibility, but also for the fact that like we go to places like museums to look at things and to interpret with our visual sense. There's no other traditions around non-visual interpretation. We kind of like the whole activity that the museum promotes is this idea that as kind of carried on through history, where, you know, and this practice really that has carried and evolved through history of visual interpretation and visual ways of knowing the world. And so I think, you know, what my work is really about is shifting these premises and practices that we associate to spaces like the museum, and really give people our opportunities to unlearn ableism, traditions of ableism, and to start new traditions that are led by people with lived experience, people who could speak to, say, the colonial history of the museum, who could address the barriers associated with their own access or their own experience of disability. Currently, I'm using the open access tenants. So I actually got this this grant to do this project over 3 years, where it's going to, the outcome of this project will be like a digital platform, like a website, where it will feature organizations in Vancouver with projects and protocols and services that align with the tenets of open access. So we have a bunch of different community partners, and we'll be developing criteria based on the tenets of open access, and then identifying organizations in Vancouver that kind of like represent accessibility beyond an accommodation model. So, you know, more in the ways that it's described in the open access statement. And then profiling those so folks can have sort of like this place to go to learn about like a new set of standards and practices in the area of accessibility. If we were trying to look at, say, what policy could offer as the ground floor, and like build from that. Like what is that world that we're modeling beyond policy, beyond you know, I guess recommendations that that we're supposed to be complying with. Yeah, and I guess we could get more into this as the session goes on. But I just want to thank everyone, thank everyone too for showing up, and also Parker for your amazing work.
Yeah, so thank you both for describing your practice. I think it's a really good framework to kind of begin our conversation. And we're talking about today accessibility in the arts. Most people who are currently with us are from Victoria, but we also want to acknowledge that, you know, while everyone has their own needs in the arts, a lot of them may be similar throughout BC, throughout Canada, throughout North America. So the conversation, though, while we're focusing on Victoria, we will kind of be talking about the broader accessibility in the arts. So I just kind of want to start off, I think with both Parker and Carmen, both of you talked about having that a community of care rather than looking at accommodation. And for everyone joining us, I was just wondering how you have seen a community of care happening here in Victoria, throughout Canada, throughout North America, either something you have personally experienced or maybe something that you heard an event about. I know one of our panelists sent me a article about Tangled Art and their big symposium, Crippling the Arts, how that created a really community of care. So if anyone wants to speak, they can raise their hand. Or either, oh, and I have a Linda. Linda, there you go.
Hi, I just thought it might be helpful because you did say at the beginning to keep with plain language as best as possible, and there may be some terms that other people on the call are not familiar with. So I thought it might be helpful if Carmen, you could explain a little bit about what you mean by the accommodation model. And so that people, and give some examples so that people know what we're talking about and how you're talking about, you know, going beyond that.
Thank you for that. That's a good point. I realize I had to give examples. So the accommodation model, and this is usually what I have what's available to me as someone who's disabled. There's usually, like, say when I go into a museum, there's like a few different options for the ways that I can participate. So like, say like a descriptive tour where someone will describe the work on display to me. These are accommodations. There might be something that I can touch to get a sense of what the thing in front of me looks like or how it was made. My experience is there, you know, the institution's trying to bring me into this experience that I don't have access to otherwise. So I think of an accommodation as a temporary bridge to participation. So like what I'm really hoping for with accessibility are spaces where accessibility can be planned from the ground up with the people involved. That's like ideal, because I think accessibility is temporary. It can never be universal. That's a bit of a controversial take on accessibility, is that like universal accessibility is as my friend Kay says, is a myth. Because the conditions of access are changing all the time. So something like an accommodation, these you know, like, and they're helpful. Like, I mean, of course, it's helpful to have a descriptive tour if everything is visual, but and you're experiencing it non-visually. but I think for me, the options are very restrictive and they're very prescriptive. So, you know, I wasn't consulted in terms of like what works best for me in these situations. And like these methods did not come out of like, you know, kind of like good working relationships between the people who are using them and producing them. So I really think about more mutual relationships between like care recipient and provider, and really kind of like problematizing this space of care recipient and provider, because I think these relationships between like people who need support and people who are providing it, like I think we really need to work on them, because they're not right now, like they're pretty one-sided. And I would say that an accommodation model for accessibility is more of a one-sided approach to accessibility, where there's like a provider and a recipient. And the idea is that after that, because that service is available, then you're, you know, if we're prescribing to this idea of as oppression being systemic, and these barriers being systemic that people are experiencing, then I think, you know, we're not really, you know, resolving that oppression by offering an accommodation. And I guess that's what at the root for me is the problem with just offering accommodations.
Parker, you wanted to say something? Thank you, Parker.
I couldn't. Yeah. I just quickly wanted to add, when I think about accommodation, and to build off what Carmen was saying, some things that come up in the community and people that I work with is this doing less and asking more, like beyond looking beyond accommodation, like a community of care, like Carmen mentioned, understanding that everyone is their own expert. I mean, that type of validation is so important for the development of healthy, relational, trauma-informed societies. What is foundational collaboration? Doing less and asking more. You have the privilege, you have all of these resources, ask. You know, it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you both. And thank you, Linda, for making sure that we are being accessible in our language as well. Yeah. I'm just wondering, and Parker's acknowledgement of like trauma informed, because many of the communities who are here, we all have had different forms of trauma. And I'm just wondering, again, like often for myself at least, the arts are one way to work through that trauma. And if we can't access the arts in certain ways, financially or through even visiting a institution, because either it's not accessible or we don't feel welcome in that space. Because a big part of, for me, coming once we're a post-COVID world is, unfortunately, many folks weren't feeling welcome in these arts institutions in the beginning. And if we come back in a post-COVID world where we have security guards who have to take our temperatures, or we have to have a plastic guard between us and a staff member, that will just create more layers of barriers that unfortunately may be happening. So maybe we can think about moving on to how to create virtual spaces during this time that are welcoming and creating of care, and if anyone has any examples of that. Maybe not.
I guess I just wanted to, can I jump in for a sec?
Of course, yeah.
Oh yeah, hi. So in thinking about how to gather virtually too, I think we're really talking about like how to maintain a culture of care, really, and like how to meet together in a good way, you know, across distances, across borders, you know, communities. So I wonder if that kind of resonates with some folks as well, because I think that's what, you know, a lot of folks try to do who are holding space, like in more, like I think I notice this a lot in like grassroots spaces that are intended for one group over the wider public, first and foremost. And I wonder if people have experienced some of those practices. I think are so applicable to virtual spaces as well.
I see one hand raised. Maybe I'll give it over to you, Allison.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, you are. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You're talking about caring communities and bringing the caring community into the virtual environment and possible ways of doing that. I'm responding to that request as opposed to Carmen's, you know, what Carmen has just said. So I just don't want to discount, I don't want to dismiss that he's just spoken, if this is the point. So I'm really pleased to hear a call out for ideas about that, because this is something that I myself have been confronted with in terms of moving the project, the Housing Project 101 Transformational Theatre for Rental Housing, which by its very nature seeks to create a caring community, right? And by its very nature, theater and transformational theater, the games of that require being in the same physical space as the people that you're developing your stories with, right? And it requires physical contact, right? And I've had discussions with David Diamond. Well, I haven't had discussions so much with him as some email correspondence about trying to move the games into that environment, and it just doesn't work. And yet there's a component of the workshops that I developed for the Transformational Theatre Project, the Housing Project 101. There's a component of those workshops which is called My Great Neighborhood, which can definitely be done online. And I have been struggling with how to launch that online. And do I make it a creative visualization journey that I pre-record and invite people to come on and then create some sort of artistic response to that journey? Or do I do it in a private Zoom room, right? Such as what we're doing today, where there's some sort of opportunity for interaction. And you know, one of the things I recently witnessed just on the weekend, actually, coming out of Washington, a really lovely evening of musical compositions and so I'm thinking, okay, is there a way of doing this? Then this ceases to be theater, right? So I'm here asking you guys, how do I do this? And how do I connect with the community of people who work deep enough as artists or have a deep enough experience to come together to make this a meaningful artistic journey? in the context of also creating a caring community, a community that really wants to improve the housing situation of people living in the incredible instability of our rental housing situation in British Columbia and indeed across Canada, and one could say globally. You know, in my opinion, housing and the instability of rental housing is the big elephant in the room. It's the big elephant.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. I think
I will just conclude that by saying you asked for examples of caring communities. And we just announced on the weekend, you know, the creation of homes, temporary homes in motels for 350 or 327, I think it is, of the people sleeping in the rough in Victoria. And I ask this room of artists, many of whom I know and whose work I greatly respect, how many artists are sleeping rough? And how much creativity and ingenuity lives in that community and is not properly accessed by the larger society? It is discarded, you know?
Yeah.
They are discarded and it is discarded. And, you know, I am passionate about this. And this is an accessibility issue. It is an accessibility issue, not to be dismissed.
Yeah, thank you, Allison. I think Parker has something to respond, and I also have something as well, Parker.
Yeah, just quickly, as we're talking about housing, it makes me think about infrastructure and the layout of the cities that many of us reside in. And I live in a place where heritage buildings are held dear to people's hearts. And I've always been one to challenge that because, as we know, the heritage buildings are not the most successful places. I think about ridiculous rent costs to have a building downtown. I have friends who want to create art spaces that are accessible to other demographics. They can't even afford it, one, because it's a heritage building, and two, they can't even make modifications. And I think that's extremely problematic because we're looking at how we really care. You know, I just wanted to add that piece.
Yeah, thank you, Parker. And yeah, it's a great point of we're talking about accessibility into the arts, but of course we need to have people's basic needs met first. That is part of the obstacles too, that sometimes people have to decide between paying rent and eating, and there's no way that they can afford art supplies or go out. And just talking about, bringing up a couple things that Allison talked about, thinking through the connection of, is theater if it's virtual, especially if theater is done in a very hands-on manner, as well as thinking through other online arts that have been more accessible. And I've been thinking of, there's an organization called the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium, and this is run by mostly folks in the museum fields, but they had a great webinar about making arts accessibility programming. They taught me a whole bunch of things that I found very useful, especially in terms of captioning, in terms of providing folks with some community comfort. So Another webinar I saw was organizing disability justice, and in that it talked about how people on that panel wrote food orders, because it was usually you would have a tradition of eating with other artists, and you can't have that right now, but people would actually be sent food orders so they could have dinner, and they would have dinner together on Zoom. So that was a really nice way I saw that people were still creating community even from very far away. Mm-hmm. Does anyone else have any examples of virtual programming that they felt created this community of care, or that they found very accessible? So I'm going to get Linda.
Yes. Now, I struggled technologically because we're all being thrown into this Okay, my computer keeps talking to me. Those of us who use technology as a way of doing things, but it isn't intuitive to us. We're struggling right now to catch up and to learn skills that we don't have, and maybe would never use except for under the circumstances where we're being forced into it. So yesterday there was it wasn't a Zoom room. If it had been a Zoom room, I'd have been able to handle it because I've mastered Zoom, but I don't know what it was, but I couldn't get into it. But the concept of what it was great. And Carmen, you might have heard about it, I don't know, that it was an online reading, people reading from their own homes, and it was Midsummer's Night's Dream. It was each, individual people had their parts to read. I guess a bit like when you sit down and do a play in the beginning, you just do a read through. This was what it was like, but everybody was doing it from a distance. And all of these participants in this were either blind or partially sighted. So I was really anxious to see how it went. I didn't get a chance. So one of the challenges we talk about when we're saying, how can we do this virtually? We need to make sure that everybody's up to speed with virtual. And, we have a lot of people who still don't have access. I think someone was saying, was it somebody in the introduction? I don't know, about that a lot of virtual communities don't even have, very good internet access. Indigenous communities don't have internet access. There are a lot of people with disabilities for one reason or another cannot interact with technology, or can't afford it, or can't afford the internet, or just haven't got the capacity and the skill to learn how to do it, especially if it has to be done through an adapted method. So I don't think we're going to solve this during this particular. Hopefully, this is the only bout of this crisis that we have. We're working, but I guess I was just thinking this reading was interesting. So if there was some information, if there was, I remember a few years back there were, and I missed it, but there was a presentation of people just talking about their homeless experiences. And something like that could be done, either written or just verbalizing and sharing for the general community to listen to. So I think there are ways, but using virtual is going to be a challenge for a bit. Thanks.
That's great, Linda. It really makes me think too of when we're creating and thinking through this futurism of more accessible arts. Is this accessible for everyone? It may be accessible for those who are just in the certain disabled communities. It may be, but then those who don't have internet, so those who may be living in a place that they cannot afford or do not have internet access. So that's one thing I've really noticed when I look at online programming, is if they're looking at it just from one person's perspective, or one, for example, in the disability community, it can often just be a white settler perspective. And there's many people who are counteracting that. There's some great scholars. Alice Wong comes to mind, or Mia Mingus that Carmen had in his workshop. But it does make me think that we're making sure that everyone can access it in their own way and not just one particular group or person. Yeah. Oh, Linda, do you have, oh, and I think we have Natasha here, so I'll unmute you, Natasha. Oh, sorry, there you go.
Thanks. I just think that this is a time where we should really be thinking about the kinds of things we're sharing. Also, hi, I'm Natasha. My pronouns are she, her, they, them. And I work for a company that is mostly based in interactive events, and that's something we can't really do right now. So we're really having to choose what we share, especially on social medias. I see a lot of people sharing things like National Theatre Live and all these bigger companies that are, yes, promoting and helping people be distracted by all these wonderful things. But I think we really need to keep in mind that there are local folks and that there are people of color and that there are disabled folks who do need the support and need the support way more than international companies that already have this. So I think this is a really good chance for us to cross-promote with people that we know and that we love and that we might not know and that we might not love, but are local and do need the support. That's it from me.
I'm muted now. Linda, did you have something again?
Yeah, it was just a follow up. I wanted to give you kudos, Regan, because you have really made an exceptional efforts to make this process as accessible as possible. You've really thought of a lot of the challenges, particularly for the disability community I'm speaking of. But you know, your awareness of how to use this technology in this to work as best as it can for the disabled community. So I just wanted to acknowledge that.
Well, thank you so much, Linda. And I must say, like, for myself, it's always a process of learning, right? I have my own disabilities. I've had my own experiences, but learning from everyone. As you said before, through the Accessibility Working Group, I've been honored that I've worked with a lot of folks who are from different communities, and I try to actively listen to create that community of care, and I think that's something that we're all trying to do. So thinking through, we've talked a little bit about virtual space and creating a comfortable space. What about looking into the future? Now, we all don't know what will be happening in the future, even more so now, but I want to think through what kind of possibilities are there? What are you who are looking for? What are you missing out in terms of arts access? How have you been involved or not involved or couldn't be involved? And what would you like to see change in terms of making arts more accessible for you? Perhaps maybe Carmen or Parker, if you want to speak to that question, maybe you can get. Yeah, Parker.
Just what you said in terms of how to make the arts more accessible. And I think there's something that I hear quite often is that people struggling with the grant portion of things and how monotonous and I would argue not very accessible that whole process can be. And if we could shift that, find different ways to provide funding to artists who have brilliant ideas, that would be amazing. And if anybody has any of those ideas or resources, I would love to know about them because that's something that comes up quite often. Yeah.
Hi. Jumping onto that point too. I think the granting thing, like, there's so we can go so much further with granting. I think because, like, currently the Canada Council, I think, has some of the few options for, like, if you need like a disability related support, you can apply to fund that kind of stuff through the Canada Council's like Access Support Fund. The BC Council is developing that same sort of those sorts of options, so like artists don't have to like pay out of pocket for accessibility related costs. But I think now where we're at is an interesting time to be thinking of like whose experience to prioritize right now. And what kind of what do we prioritize with what we direct our resources to? I think it's a real, like, it's a time where we can really think about what does it mean to what does it mean to support an artist when we're like struggling to address our survival based needs, like maybe precarious housing, loss of income, all these kinds of things. Like I signed up for a couple Facebook groups just for artists during COVID, and I noticed like a bunch of different opportunities and calls for like, if you had $500 right now, what would you do with it? Like, give us a proposal for like an art project that you could pull off with $500. I'm like, that is, I mean, like, I'd probably buy groceries with that $500. I think I really think instead of making like, if you do have access to a budget or some programming resources or something, like how to better support what people are really struggling with, rather than creating like busy work for artists, or even just like time online where we could, like, it's so severely limited in terms of like the the kind of support resources that people have access to right now, artists do. But this, and from community to community, like it's so limited as well. And where you think I did a lot of work with organizations in the downtown east side in Chinatown in Vancouver, and a lot of the cultural resources that are available to the wider arts community, like, artists living in the downtown east side don't have access to those resources at all, because of the sometimes even like what do the criteria that determine, granting agency determines whether or not they qualify as an artist. Do they have like a track record? Can you even, do they need support? Do they need support to actually apply for the grant being offered in the first place? So like, I think there's so many different things that we could do to reorient these processes, and even like the purpose of these programs as well, around to respond to the current moment, or to respond to like an unsustainable sort of like, I think the art world has been pretty exclusive and inaccessible and unsustainable for the longest time. And I think this is a time where we could really slow down and really take things step by step, and not try, like, it's hard because like I'm on a tangent here, but just the worry about like, how do we do the important work that we're dedicated to now in a totally different way? It's going to take time to learn how to navigate this space. We've really, I guess, like, I think it's, how do you plan for something that hasn't, like, for the unknown? I think it's really just like reassessing what the purpose of what you're doing is, in some ways as well. Sorry, I got a little distracted, but hopefully that wasn't too rambly.
That was great. I saw a lot of nodding of heads.
Yeah.
Because it is, when I first when I first programmed this was going to be in person, and talking about futurisms was a very different time than talking about futurisms now, when there is a lot of uncertainty. But I like your thought about, that slowing down, really taking this as an opportunity to look at what we are doing, maybe as an individual, or as an organization for some folks, and really looking at what is needed. But I guess part of that is also listening to those who have yet been heard or heard enough, and making sure that, again, they're listened to. And I see Linda has her hand raised. So there you go, Linda.
Hi, I feel like I'm dominating here, so that's why I was sitting back and waiting for it, let others speak. I guess, sorry, somebody's just.
Oh, yeah, someone's just using the chat.
Yeah, and sorry. When you guys send a chat, it's our computers, for those of us using screen readers, start talking like crazy, and then we can't focus on what we're trying to say. Anyways, but that sounded like a really good resource that was coming in. So certainly, if those can be shared afterwards, I guess I think this is. Oh, no problem, Ashley. I'm thinking that I think the art gallery has, you've started and you've taken on the role of connecting us, and I think that this is an incredibly great first step of just giving us a platform to connect, and to have these conversations, and to it may take us a bit to figure out what it is or what we can do or how we can move forward. But keeping us connected through Zoom, and something on a fairly regular basis. I know there's a follow-up, and if there can perhaps be more after that, to help us work through this of, depending on whether we're going to have to do this virtually for a bit, or how we can gradually get back into a non-distancing art world. So I think that's great. As far as me personally, in terms of what I'd like to see in the future, for me personally, I'd like to see making connections with other artists. I don't have those connections, and I need support to take. And I'm an older person who's starting art late in life, but I really want to express some of my thoughts and feelings about things through art, but I need some help. So I need to be connected with other people who can do the bits of it that I can't perhaps do. So I would love to see that, some sort of a network set up where we can connect with people. And that even could perhaps happen during COVID, because someone like myself could say, well, I need these particular supplies, but I can't go out and get them, but maybe someone else can, and they can drop them off at my house on the doorstep, and I can leave the money on the doorstep or whatever. But just making some connections, I think, for me personally, and helping people who would like to get into the art world who haven't really explored it in the past. And also, I think one of the things that I would like to see, most of the people in Victoria probably are aware that the Disability Resource Centre does an art show each year for artists with disabilities. And I would really like to see that expand and become more inclusive. It's been slow to do that, and but I'm not necessarily the person to make that happen, but I would like to see more effort in that regards to making that whole art show more inclusive, and not just necessarily, as Carmen explained, just do accommodations, but actually try and perhaps feature art that is being created for that's multisensory. There's very little of that in that art show at this point. So, helping those folks, think in that regards. So that's what I'd like to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. Yeah. And actually your comment made me think too of this the thought of artists with disabilities or disabled artists, or sometimes it can also be Indigenous artists or artists who isn't kind of that. Are you making art and are you only seen as what you identify as? Or are you just an artist who happens to be Indigenous, happens to have a disability? And I think I see a lot in Victoria, and I see it in other places too, where they exhibitions where it's all disabled artists or artists, all Indigenous artists or all Black artists, and maybe this is great because it gives opportunity and it gives payment to these artists, but it also, I don't know how some folks feel. I've heard from some folks who don't like being labeled and just want to make art. Other folks who are tired of being just classed in certain exhibitions that are all just one community. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts to that. But, yeah. And then also Linda's comment to the chat. We have someone who says that they can provide free art supplies through Supply Victoria. So just that, so some people are aware of those who are looking for supplies right now. Maybe that could be a great opportunity. Mm-hmm.
Hi. I wanted to say too, around this whole time where you know, I think it's interesting, like where we can, there's this idea from Arundhati Roy, who's an author from India, who posed this idea as the pandemic as portal. So like, what is the transformative nature of this time? And you know, I think in thinking about what the purpose, like what we're dedicated to, the purpose or aim of our work, I think it's important to think about what, yeah, like what kinds of things do we want to be doing moving forward, and really, like I sometimes when I'm talking about open access and in museum context, especially more like traditional sort of museum settings, you know, folks ask like, what would it take to make the museum openly accessible around your terms? And I think that's like really, it really could mean whatever you want it to mean. And I think I usually ask people to think more dynamically about the museum and about accessibility, and like, you know, is there potentially like, you know, a work in the collection that could be sold off to support a project that needs funding, or an initiative that needs resources? You know, could we think about the structure, or even like connections across departments, collaboration, how people work within the institution, and if that could be changed? You know, do we only do the work that's indicated by our title, or do we do what we're passionate about, and how is that shared across a, you know, in a workplace? But I think sometimes, you know, these institutional structures, you know, the framework of a museum, the framework, like the way it runs an organization, like, I think it could be a time to think more dynamically about that as well. And sometimes when we're talking about open access and disability discourse, we think about like, you know, could an organization reflect the evolving disabled body? You know, could, you know, I recently had this talk about open access with the group, and we were thinking about like, what if for one programming season the organization just closed down and worked on its internal processes and maybe like relations among staff. And this was before COVID, but you know, even thinking about like, you know, could an organization take a year to really just work on what its mission or mandate is and how to strengthen that and reorient it around like a radically different set of parameters. You know, I know we don't want to be planning for like a non-COVID time, when well, sorry, reverse that. We don't want to be preparing for social distancing. Well, that will eventually end, but I think it's just a time to reassess what those, like the way we work and potentially even like the way that organizations operate right now, and like, do we have time to think about like the wellness of our working relationships?
Yeah, that really makes me think about the productivity, how we're all supposed to be very productive during this time and always, which is a sign with capitalism and colonialism. And but what does it look like for an institution to not do programming for a year, to really focus in on itself? I wonder if the same for artists too, if an artist wasn't so productive in making art, but just looking through their process of how they are making art and how they want to make art in the future. So I see 2 hands. Just Linda.
Yeah, I wanted to know whether, because the BC Museum, Provincial Museum, is planning a major renovation. And I was invited to a, what do you call it, a focus group last June time, to talk about, you know, what, as a representative of, well, I'm not even sure which hat I was wearing at that time, but I spoke to disability issues particularly. But I was just wondering, for instance, like Parker, were you aware of that? Or Carmen, were you aware of that, where you were contacted? Because you weren't at the meeting I was at, but there might have been others.
No, so neither, yeah, oh, Parker.
No, I wasn't aware. Thank you.
So this, am I still unmuted?
Yep, you're still.
Yeah, so I'm just thinking that this, as we say, this is a time when, as Carmen suggested, this is a time when, you know, the staff at the museum could be looking at this and reflecting on this and connecting with perhaps more people in terms of what might this look like. If they're going to renovate it, let's do it from the bottom up. And so we're not, you know, we're redesigning this space be as inclusive as possible. So, you know, that might be a follow-up from you know, this meeting, or what we would like to see. I mean, it is just some way of connecting with institutions and planting this seed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that, Linda. And I just wonder, before anyone else have a comment? I'll let Allison. There you go, Allison.
Thank you. I actually put my hand up in response to the first question that opened this section of the discussion. And that was a question with regards about experience of difficulty in accessing opportunities and that sort of things. And I'll just mention that I did put my hand up in response to that. And although I had put my hand up, it wasn't responded to. And sorry, my phone is ringing. So I just sort of mentioned that. And then somebody put my hand down for me. without calling on me. And then I put my hand up again, and Linda spoke and mentioned that she felt she was hogging.
Oh, sorry if you
Am I-
weren't responded to.
So the point that I'm making, right, is I'm using what happened in the room with me raising my hand this afternoon in response to your initial question about difficulty in accessing opportunities to show your work or to express your voice. How easy it is, even in an environment such as this, where we're really working to create a caring, inclusive community. How easy, how very easy it is to not see someone. Or if you do see that person, to perhaps form an opinion fairly early on about them that somehow dismisses them. And, you know, it's really, really easy not to see a lot of the people around us who have things to bring to the table. And Natasha also referenced this when she spoke. You know, she talked about how easy it is to share the post about, you know, the big Shakespeare event or the big, you know, multinational event or the big national event. And we don't share the post about the local person who's trying to establish something. And so how do we open our eyes wider so that we do see everybody and include everybody? You know, and one of the things also that was talked about was the granting system, and I'm glad that was brought up. Because one of the things that I will say, and I know that I'm harping on this topic of unstable housing, but it's incredibly difficult to navigate the granting system when you don't know where you're going to be living in 6 months' time. And, you know, that struggle, that housing struggle, that's rampant. And I think that we don't hear too many voices about it because so much of the focus is on the desperation of the homeless. And then, you know, we just don't, the people who are struggling to keep their housing, that is what they do in their lives.
For sure.
Is that an accessible society? Does that create an equitably accessible to the arts, an equitable accessibility to the arts? No, it does not. And we cannot continue to dismiss it.
Yeah.
That's my passion for the year.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry for my phone ringing in the middle of that.
Yeah. Parker, you had your hand up?
Yeah, if there's time before you get to your next point.
Go ahead. Yeah.
It just made me think about cultural sensitivity and safety, and some of the conversations that we have of critiquing the healthcare system and not having proper cultural protocols. That's a whole nother layer of, you know, ways of being. We speak about disability, and then we speak about the artist who has, like, what I'm saying is, as an individual, we are complex, and there's layers to that. And accessibility, we have to redefine what that even looks like, what that means. And I think I would challenge, or at least offer, that cultural protocol be in that as well, because I have friends who create art and they don't want to go into certain spaces. And I get it, fair enough. So yeah, that would be another thought of mine.
That's a great Parker. I think that should definitely, the fact that for settlers coming to this land and acknowledging that we as a people have brought a lot of things, the capitalism, the ableism, and using the local protocols as a starting point for kind of that slowdown of looking at organizations and art. Thank you for that. Yeah, I believe Carmen.
Yeah, I guess to add just on the cultural protocol side of things too, side of things too. I think the groups, the organizations that can do that really well are groups that are serving communities that are frontline, sort of on the frontline level. Because they have like the most direct sort of like interaction with people who are in need of services or who are in need of those protocols. So like, you know, I really look to grassroots organizations in the downtown east side where they're like arts based or not, or just or service based, and a lot of organizations down there provide both. So you know, they address survival based needs and are, you know, they have opportunities for folks to, you know, participate in art production or artistic development. I think those organizations are really, yeah, like I feel like embracing practices and protocols that really respond to the changing needs in the community. And like, you know, you'll see it from like month to month change based on what's urgent in the community, from week to week. I mean, you know, I'm thinking of a few different things, like when, like, yeah, like I feel like you know, in that neighborhood, like it's very clear that the support network is very interdependent, and it's organizations serving other organizations to serve residents. And I think it's, you know, that's the thing that's often missing in accessibility or programming or services delivered by like more major mainstream institutions, is that like that community feedback, like what someone needs, that responsiveness, it's not as direct, and it's, and also I think yeah, like they're usually, I think we just need to be working more low to the ground in many ways, so we could actually start having these. Oh, what I was going to say is that like the survival-based needs is something that the arts doesn't really do well. Like whether it's being provided, say I get an opportunity at some other art gallery in some other city and it's not COVID times, you know, all that it takes for me to get to that place, like the travel, the accessibility accommodations, like the disability related support that I would need, like all of that is an extra conversation, and it actually takes up more room than the conversation about my art, and the work that I'm doing. That's like in a typical sort of like, it's not ideal, but that's kind of like the state of things really for me as an artist. Usually that conversation about accessibility is bigger than the conversation about the work. In the best situations, I don't have to think so much about the support that I'm getting because it's all taken care of. My host is really like hearing me and really following up on things. And I get to make, you know, the work that I had set out to make. And, you know, I think this is it's an experience that many disabled artists share. You know, I've interviewed many disabled artists about their own experiences working in more mainstream institutions, and yeah, just like this conversation about accessibility, like it's so limited, like across the board, that I think we really just need to keep asking these questions, and we have to keep developing our own protocols, our own practices, our own like kind of definitions for what accessibility is like in our communities. Because I think that's going to change from place to place, and yeah, and it would be nice to, I think, to know what accessibility could be right now, rather than just like relying on, you know, different frameworks that are already available to us, like, you know, that come through legislation and so on.
And I guess that goes to what is possible. What are these, if we had all of the money in the world, what could we possibly be doing to support artists, to support visitors who enjoy watching performance, going to exhibitions, to access all of these spaces? Do we need to rethink everything, and as you say, Carmen, having it more base level needs? Should the major institutions like the Art Gallery be looking at how they can support housing and food, other than just paying artist fees to folks? I really like that idea of branching out and thinking about the greater needs of society, and how art can, the creativity of art and the innovation of art can help with that. So we're down to kind of the final 10 minutes of this community conversation. And I just want to make sure that folks who haven't had a chance to speak yet, if they have anything to say at this time. Ooh, yeah. And we got a couple. So,
my name is pronounced Meharuna.
Thank you. I didn't want to say it incorrectly. Thank you, Meharuna.
It's okay. I'm a artist. I'm a spoken word artist and a published writer. And I want to thank you, Regan, so much for organizing this. And I identify as she, her. And I'm a person with a disability. I have multiple sclerosis, and I have mobility challenges. And the way I approach, there's so many valuable things that have been shared. And so I'm trying really hard to articulate and capture all the ideas that are going through my head. So I think one thing I do want to say, and so forgive me if I don't come back right on track with the different comments with people, but there was something said about whether or not, how does one identify themselves? And how I have gone through that process, that question in my head for a very long time, where once I identified through being like BIPOC, like being a person of color, racialized individual, but then I moved from that. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm working on my own memoir, and it is around identity and belonging and my journey through that. And in that mix is now, in the last 17 years, my MS journey. And literally in this call, like right now, my focus is right now looking at what mobility aids I'm going to need. And so what I was going to say was, one of the pieces I've written is around definitions, the limitations that are associated by assigning a label. And I don't want to be assigned a label, actually. But there are times where I do assign a label to myself when it comes to a safe space like this, where I want people to know where I'm at, so I can relate to other people. But then there's other spaces I don't want to share my identity in that regard of me having MS, because it requires a lot of energy and courage and strength and vulnerability to put myself out there and then have somebody come to me and treat me like, oh, poor you, because I'm trying to get through my own courage and strength to get out there and be strong in it, in my fluctuation of identities. So I like to come back to, I'm intersectional, my identity is going to change, and it's changing all the time, and there's nothing in this world, in this place, that's going to define me. And that comes back down to systems, and systems are set up in old language from, let's say, colonization language that needs to be decolonized, that is not. But systems are controlled by people. Systems are made by people. So people are changing all along the journey. And until people change, systems won't change. So that's going to take time. And so I like to see myself leading with my art. I want to lead with my art. And what I would come back to then is, what are the feelings that are being put out through my art, or that I get from other artists, as opposed to necessarily my labels. So hopefully that made sense. And I didn't touch on the last question, but those are the thoughts that I wanted to share. Thanks.
That was beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, it really, I feel like I share a similar of who you share your identity with, what parts of your identity. Yeah, it's, and kind of that thought of like coming out to a person in a way, with who you are and all aspects, because it's a vulnerable thing for sure to tell someone. Yeah, thank you. And I just want to, so we're down to the last couple of minutes. What I might do is kind of end with final thoughts from Carmen and Parker. If either of you have anything to say before we conclude. No?
I just want to thank everybody for taking this time to chat about accessibility, and know that this is like not yeah, we're not concluding anything here. These conversations, hopefully they do continue, and yeah, we find good ways to meet around these topics. I think we have so much, everybody has so much wisdom to offer from where they're at right now. I, for one, am still like really like not even haven't even started processing like at any depth this whole time right now. So yeah, hopefully we'll find some time soon to meet again. But I also want to say, like, these, yeah, like we've been, as within the disability community, but also other historically marginalized groups, like we've had to contend with like times of crisis a lot, and I think persevere within those times and problem solve, find new ways, find good ways, and I think that's what like folks with disabilities, like this is it's so destabilizing for everybody right now. But I think there are certain ways that we're meeting now, like on Zoom too. Like this is a medium that I've been using for a long time with other disabled folks to meet, and I think you know, even the negotiations that people are making, the way people are disclosing their needs to others right now, this is so alive within the disability community on a daily basis. And so I just want folks to know that they're engaged in something that is, yeah, like it's a matter of survival for most folks within the disability community, talking about accessibility, talking about care and how to live in caring communities with one another. And yeah, hopefully we can continue to do that here and within the museum as well, and wherever we go back to after this. So thank you.
Parker?
Yeah, I just thank you for sharing the space with me today. It was really heartwarming, and also thank you for facilitating this. It was major. Yeah, so I really quick, just there was so much information shared, and I want to take a moment to appreciate the vulnerability. I know it's still kind of a form of public speaking for folks, so you know, thank you for sharing that. And a couple of things that I'm going to leave here with thinking about is the technology piece, the accessibility around technology, and also what was just said about complex identity, and that our identity changes and it shifts, and that's okay. And however you want to present it is also okay. And for me, I forget about that sometimes, and I like to blame capitalism and rigidity of schedule and all of this, where I just get lost in that. So thank you for that reminder. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you both, Carmen and Parker, and for everyone joining us here today, and everyone who took the time to comment. I just want to note that the next conversation will be happening May 13th. And this all these conversations are basically leading towards a program that so far I've called Disable the Arts, or Disassemble the Arts, sorry. And it's going to be looking at arts and accessibility, and how we gauge that program at the art gallery depends on the feedback that we're getting from folks. So through these conversations, through one-on-one conversations, through artists, I really want to make it some kind of programming that looks at how we can opening up the arts to make it so as many people as we can support them in attending, in showing, in being paid for their work. So that will be coming somewhere in the future. But thank you again for joining us. And like I said, you will receive a recording of this and a transcription in the next week or two. So thank you, everyone.